Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of That Solo Life, the podcast for PR pros, marketers, really anyone who is a solopreneur who owns their own business. My name is Michelle Kane and my company is Voice Matters. I am joined today by my fantastic co-host Karen Swim of Solo PR Pro. And today we are so thrilled to have a special guest, Ken Byler of Higher Ground Consulting Group. You know, as PR pros, we're used to managing crises, but this COVID-19 crisis it's a crisis like no other. It's upended so much of our work and our personal lives. So, you know, how do we make sure we're providing the leadership that our clients, our colleagues, and our peers need from us, while also taking the time to practice the self-care that we need to keep going? So that's why we're so thrilled to have Ken with us. He is a leadership guide with his own practice, Higher Ground Consulting Group, and he is the principal and founder of this group located in Souderton, Pennsylvania, where he helps leaders and their teams to thrive. And I've seen this firsthand over the years. He does this through workshops focused on self-discovery and interpersonal skills development, coaching to help leaders grow and change, and employee selection using assessments to find the best fit, which is really cool. Ken is passionate about leadership, and he writes a weekly blog for his firm's website and publishes a monthly e-news. So you might want to check that out after this and get on that list. He is an Everything Disc authorized partner, a 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team authorized partner, and a PXT Select authorized partner. He's active in the local community, serving on a number of boards, and was president of our local Indian Valley Chamber of Commerce back in 2010, which is where we met. He lives in Bucks County, Pennsylvania with his wife, Melody, and they are parents of an adult son. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so thrilled to have you.
It is my pleasure, Michelle and Karen. Thanks for inviting me.
Sure.
We're so thrilled to chat with you today and to learn from you.
We are. So Ken, what's the biggest question or request you're getting from your clients right now?
Well, obviously it varies because my clients are both large and small and for-profit, not-for-profit. But I think there's a consistent question that leaders are pondering, and that is what's next? And I'm sure you probably heard that question as well.
Yes, we have.
and I would say my answer has been pretty consistent. And part of my answer is probably because of the work that I do with leaders and leadership. But I usually tell them that this current crisis is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for leaders to show who we are. And I would say that some of us are going to come out of this experience stronger, and some are probably going to come out weaker. But at the end of the day, the thing we have to do as leaders right now is help our people with their own stuff rather than just focusing on ourselves and what we're worried about.
That's so true. And, you know, we think of that all the time, you know, as we're counseling our clients, you know, how we can always be better preparing ourselves to be of service to them and how we can be the leader that they need right now. You know, do you have any tactics that you're sharing with your clients?
Well, I'll just give a quick example from my own practice because obviously I've had to make some pretty significant changes with, you know, the work that I do. Now, the coaching clients that I have, that's much easier to manage during something like this because even in lockdown mode, we can connect by phone or virtually using Zoom, which we are doing and have done. But all the workshops that I do primarily have been in person in the past. And so I'm having to pivot all of my planned workshops coming up. Some of them have been postponed because people want the in-person sessions. But I am doing this afternoon my first virtual training for one of my clients, and I'm excited about that opportunity. So that is some of the stuff I'm doing, but that's driven pretty much by what my clients need from me right now. Mm-hmm. And I would say that if you're, particularly if you're an organization that is working with any kind of partners or team members who are remote, that is a big deal right now because people aren't used to doing that. At least the leaders I work with have typically not been used to working with team members. Are you finding that yourselves as well?
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of people that have had to pivot to remote work. I, in my business, also work with telehealth companies. And it's interesting because, you know, for like people like Michelle and I, we're used to working remotely, and a telehealth company is accustomed to doing it, but they're finding a lot of others in their industry are not. And it's, we sort of have taken it for granted, but we forget that it's a huge adjustment for people to pivot from in-person, on-site work to now being in an environment that's unfamiliar, which can, has different stressors, especially if you have a family. The entire family is now sharing your workspace. And so, how do you get through those times? I mean, what have been your strategies for making the pivot? Because it's not just the technology, it's also kind of that mental perspective shift.
Right. So for me, because I do so much work with leaders, I spend a lot of time helping people that I coach and teach to better understand their own priorities, like what drives them, what gets them out of bed in the morning. And also in times like this, what are the fears and anxieties that are getting in the way? And so it's really important for leaders, especially if they're managing remote teams, to understand that you have to take care of yourself first. So if you're not getting enough rest, if you're not managing your own insecurities and fears, that's going to come through to your remote team. But then you also have to try to I would say, be more empathetic and less judgmental about what other people are dealing with, because we all deal with these crises in very different ways. So I tend to be more, I would say, resolute and objective and self-assured. It's just the mindsets that I am most comfortable with. It's my personality trait to be that way. So I'm not slowing down because of this crisis. I'm looking for new opportunities. I'm disciplined enough to do the things that I know I need to do to be successful when this thing is over and finally people are back to work. But not everybody thinks that way. So, for example, one of my clients, it worries a lot more about the relationship part of their interaction. So when they're remote, they're not having that interpersonal stuff that most of us, this person anyway, is used to having. And so what I've coached them to think about is, well, how can you create some of those same kinds of relationship enhancing activities and behaviors in other ways? Is it, maybe more checking in more often than what you usually would do? Is it using Zoom technology or anything virtual so you can see their face? Is it being more tactful about how you put emails together? Anything you can think of that would make it easier for you to keep that relationship intact. But for me personally, that's not something I need from somebody. So if I'm not talking to people all day, it doesn't bother me. But it does bother this person. And I think that's the thing we have to understand as leaders. Not everyone is coping the same way. And certainly, as you mentioned, Karen, there's people who have kids and pets and all kinds of other distractions in their houses right now, which is a very different environment for them to be working in.
No, that never happens on this podcast. We never have barking dogs in the background.
Your dog never barks, Michelle?
Oh, no, especially not during the podcast. I mean, goodness, he's an angel. Actually, he's zonked out in the other room right now, so it's ideal. No, that's true. And it really ties into a lot of what you do, Ken, is just knowing ourselves and acknowledging that and really, thinking through a different lens, which, I don't know, in your experience, do you find that a lot of people in business, they silo that? They think, well, business is business and I don't really have my empathy turned on, or, that emotional intelligence.
Here's a great way to think about that. So we already know that a lot of businesses are laying off people or shutting down completely. Now, some of that was because, the governors or whoever is in charge of the area where you live is mandating some of those things if you're considered non-essential businesses. But imagine if you had a company of, let's say, 25 people. Let's just use a little smaller scenario. And you were considered essential. But let's just say that the revenue was slowing down because of the kind of work you do. Mm. One thing that leaders would, if depending on who the leader is, their sort of, I'd say default response would be, well, I have to lay everybody off in order to save money so that I can keep the business running. But what if instead that same leader thought differently about that and said, I wonder if my employees would be willing to do some sacrificing together so that we could all keep our jobs. So let's have a conversation about that. What would it look like if everybody took a pay cut, if you can afford to, or maybe some people would take more than others, just to help us all be able to stay, keep our incomes, but manage the lower demand for our services or products or whatever you're selling. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. If you default to what your maybe fear is telling you to do, that might not be the right response to have. And if you're not emotionally intelligent enough to understand that your mindsets that you're comfortable with tend to be the ones that you use the most, and they don't apply in every situation, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And at the end of the day, I think your employees are going to view you as less caring and empathetic. And at the end of the day, your customers and your business too is probably going to be impacted because of the decisions you've made from this default mode of thinking.
Right, right. Yeah, that's so true. And, that we talk about emotional intelligence and, I don't know, it's like taking your brain to the gym. I don't know, taking your emotions to the gym. Well, is there any way to check in with yourself on that? Or
well, here's the thing. I mean, there's different ways that people understand emotional intelligence. And one way to think about it is that it's nothing more than a particular emotional or interpersonal approach to the situation. So when I'm doing coaching, there's many, many times when my clients simply want somebody to listen to them. They want me to be a shoulder to cry on, so to speak. And if I'm not able to demonstrate to them that I'm empathizing, by that I mean asking thoughtful questions, listening better, showing some compassion, being supportive instead of judging how they're feeling about things, they're going to feel like I didn't care, or they're going to feel like I didn't really understand what they were going through. And so even though I'm not naturally wired to be an empathizing person all the time, I am emotionally intelligent enough to know what those traits look like, and I can practice them for a particular situation when it's called for. And that's what leaders need to understand. Our IQ, which is, the intellectual part of our makeup, typically doesn't change very much. You're born with a certain genetic makeup, and for the most part, you can't change it. You might hone some things, but you're not going to improve it a lot. Emotional intelligence is not like that. If you understand emotional intelligence and all the different mindsets that come into play, you can learn to stretch and be more effective in situations where it's called for. So like right now, for example, I have to be more dynamic and outgoing because I'm in a environment here where I'm talking to two people and I'm talking to hopefully a bunch of listeners out there. And so if I don't come across as somebody who projects a strong social presence or shows some emotion, people are not going to be as engaged. And so those are skills that you can learn, even though your personality might be like mine is, to be much more introverted. Does that make sense?
Oh,
yeah,
perfect
absolutely.
sense. Yeah. Yeah. We find we have to be on more often than not, and in a genuine way, not, because people see through that. And that kind of speaks to what, one of the core pillars of what you do, Ken, is, the Everything Disc program is really where you dig in and discover your personality traits. And I know I've seen in your work that helps coworkers understand each other and go, oh, that's why they react this way to X situation. I understand that now. So now I know how to approach it, not just, oh boy, they're really being a jerk today.
Right.
Right.
Well, I often start my workshops with people, especially if I'm doing the Everything Disc Workplace Profile, which helps us understand how our personalities impact the priorities that we bring to work every day. I often start with an exercise where I have everybody think about somebody that they work with who they struggle to get along with. And I have them write a list of all the characteristics or qualities that they would use to describe that person. And of course, you can imagine, bossy, domineering, insensitive, uncaring, you name it. They come up with all these negative things. And then I ask them to think about somebody at work that, again, they need to work with, but they get along pretty well with, and describe that person, they would say, oh, they're helpful and supportive. They're kind and considerate. They're friendly, all these positive things. And then I ask them, what's the difference between the two lists? And so I'm going to pose that question to the two of you. What's the difference between those two lists?
It's subjective.
Yeah.
It's through a certain lens.
But keep going. What else? What's the difference? It's not just a list of negative and positive characteristics. It's pretty much about our perception.
Aha.
In other words, it has nothing to do with what the person's actually like. It's just our perception of their behavior and whether we appreciate that or not. And so when people start to think about it that way, then you can say to them, well, wait a minute. Somebody that you think is pushy or domineering or aggressive is just being assertive. That's a description of their behavior. It's not making a judgment about who they are. When you say they're bossy, now you're making a judgment. You're allowing your perception to decide that assertive behavior is bossy to you. But it isn't really bossy behavior. It's assertive behavior. It's more assertive than you are. It's pushing for your own ideas. It's letting people know that I have something to say and I want to say it. It doesn't mean that that's good or bad. And so when people understand that, suddenly they can say to themselves, well, now, if I have a more assertive coworker, or in your case, a client, I don't have to be just receptive to them all the time and just be willing to compromise and set aside my own needs. I can talk back to them and they'll probably respect me more because I'm being assertive just like they are. And that is often a huge revelation for people when they are in a situation where they typically never think about behavior in any way except through their own lens of judgment, which isn't helpful.
Yeah, from your lips. And we know in this business, perception is reality so often.
Very much
that
so.
was really insightful. I mean, that's a good point about just shifting your perspective to deal with the various personality types. And you're right. We tend to gravitate towards those personality types that are comfortable for us. And we might block out or choose not to do business with people where our perceptions don't line up. And we view it as we have a negative perception. So that's a really good tip.
Yeah. And what that's done for me is it's allowed me to work with all different kinds of clients in all different kinds of settings. And people are often surprised when especially when I'm in a public speaking setting or a classroom where I'm in front of a bunch of people, that I'm more introverted. Then they say, well, how in the world do you do that? And all I tell them, well, it's because I understand myself really well. And I know what I have to do differently so that people will respond the way I'm hoping they respond, because you have to be engaging in a classroom setting or online or anywhere. And I've learned how to do that. It's not I would say it doesn't come across, I hope it doesn't come across as an act, but I feel like I can do it genuinely, but I just can't do it all the time. And so that's the other thing that people need to understand. And if you're a leader and you're trying to help your team members right now, you need to know that if you're not naturally empathetic, it's going to take a ton of energy for you to be more empathetic. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you can't do it 24/7. And so I have to take breaks after I do a class, where I can't do a class for 24 hours straight. I just can't. I have to take breaks in order to recharge my batteries, because that's what introverts need to do.
Yeah.
And that's what self-awareness is all about. And DISC is a great tool to do that. And I love to teach people how to use it, either as a coaching tool or use it in a classroom setting, because it is so powerful in opening our eyes to the way that we view the world and how other people view us because of that too.
Right. And that's so helpful to people in our arena on two levels, just in our dealings with clients and colleagues, but also as communicators, realizing that and thinking of how you come across in your messaging and speaking to the different audiences that we do on behalf of our clients.
Absolutely. Because right now, the DISC model, which is just an acronym for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. Right now, the D's, if you have a D client, they're feeling vulnerable because they are losing control. And they often feel like they're being taken advantage of by the government right now. So that's why they may get more defensive or be more challenging They might get more impatient, less sensitive to people because they're afraid of losing control. If you're working with somebody who's more of an S, their loss right now is harmony. The fact that they don't have relationships, there's no stability anymore in their lives. And so for them, they might show up as being maybe more indecisive than ever, or maybe they push back harder when you're trying to make changes, or they might even be too accommodating to what you're suggesting just because they don't have the energy right now to make the battle because they feel like they've lost so much stability in their lives. So that's the insight. If you know that about your clients and you see those reactions, you can imagine, well, there's fear behind that. What can I do as a trusted advisor to lower the anxiety level? And that is a big part of what I'm trying to do right now. I'm offering specific ideas for my clients because I know my clients really well that I think that will help them to lower their anxiety. So I have one larger organization where I basically went in and said, look, your entire senior leadership team, if they need coaching right now because they're feeling stressed, I'll do complimentary 30-minute coaching sessions for the next month just to help you get through this because I know that's probably what you need. And that's the kind of thing I can offer because I know my clients really well. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily what I would offer to other people. So like the class I'm doing this afternoon is a totally different story because their business is shut down right now. So it's a perfect opportunity for them to take some of their key leadership people and put them through some training because normally they wouldn't have time for it. And so that's what I offered to them. Now I'm going to get paid for that, but it's, it's the idea of knowing how to leverage what you bring to the table for the needs and fears and anxieties that your clients are dealing with right now.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's so important. And especially, as counselors to a certain degree with our clients is also trying to think ahead and think of ways to be helpful, even as small as, I did a quick, Zoom background for a couple of them with their logos and, but, even on a bigger scale, just saying, hey, we're going to get through this at some point. So let's start thinking what that looks like if you're able in that industry. And we encourage all our fellow solos out there to, take the lead in that and be the counselor they might need right now and keeping all of these elements in line of, what makes us as people really informs how we're going to engage each other because everything's heightened right now too, right? Everyone's,
Yeah, for sure.
And
I would say too, that because of the industry you're in and a lot of us who are solo entrepreneurs are like this, we can be really good right now at reminding our clients about the basic things that they need to do. So I'm reminding my clients because I work with leaders about some of the things that they need to pay attention to, like being more empathetic and less judgmental, how contagious fear is, to be there for other people, even if they're working remotely, to be more compassionate and to ask for help themselves because that's something they might need. But your clients in your PR business, for example, the two of you, your clients might need to be reminded that, hey, social media and advertising still needs to happen.
Yes.
You still need to keep the word out there about what you're doing. Maybe you could leverage a new PR opportunity by highlighting something that your business is doing or your employees are doing to help people in the not-for-profit world right now, or to help their neighbors, or maybe there's some fundraising you can do, whatever. There's lots of ways that you can initiate that. But I think most of our clients are so wrapped up right now in just trying to survive that they're not thinking about the basics. And we need to remind them about that.
That's a great point.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And, it's just so important. There are so many different balls to keep our eyes on these days, of, like you say, taking care of the crucial things, keeping an eye on staying afloat, that, it's easy for these things to get usurped. But I think it's important. I think all three of us agree, I operate from the perspective of business is relationship. So, at different times in life, you speak differently to people. So now it's more of, especially with my small business clients, it's more of on a personal level of using their social media channels and their electronic channels to just check in. Hello, how are you? Can we be of service? What can we do to help you? And that's true on the internal side as well, with our client facing interactions of.
Yeah. I'm going to really encourage everybody who's listening to the call to be specific when you're reaching out to your clients. It's one thing to say, I'm here to help. And I've said that too, but I'm trying to be more proactive in saying, here is a specific way I can help, because that not only shows that we understand our clients really well, but it's easier for people to make a decision when you tell them something specific you can do. And even if they're not ready for it, they can always say no. But by planting the seed, you're helping them to realize, oh, there's opportunities in the middle of all this. There's possibilities here. It's not just problems and crisis. And so that's a gift you can give them by making them aware of specific ways you can help them.
I love that. That's one of my mantras. People who have known me, it's always about being specific, because that's the way that the human brain works. When you give specific details, you give people information that their brain can act on. When it's vague, you're not going to get the same result. So I love that advice.
Yeah. Well, I would say that's something that I've used effectively so far in this crisis. And I've always kind of aligned myself that way anyway. But moving forward, I think this is a lesson I've learned through this crisis, that people respond better when you come to them with some suggestions. And you have to base it on what you know about them and what they might need, because nobody wants fluff right now. Yeah. But, the client that I'm working with this afternoon, the thing that I emphasized to them was, hey, this is an opportunity. Your people are all sitting at home now. They're doing some work, but they can't do the same kind of work they were doing. Wouldn't it be great if they had a chance to really deepen their understanding of their own approach to leadership? And then we can have a conversation with the whole ownership group later on and compare notes and see what you guys can do. And for them, that was really valuable, because otherwise they wouldn't have had time to do it.
That's a great use of time, Ken. I think that's wonderful. And it's, something our listeners can, really take to heart for themselves too. If you find that you have, extra time, unfortunately, if, some work has subsided, just turn it into an opportunity. And that's what we said all along, Karen and I, just seek out the opportunities that are genuine, and you'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And recognize you may not get paid for all of it, but I think we can afford to give some time away right now too, because of the trust we have with our clients. And I am expecting that anything that I've donated in the way of time will be acknowledged later in some way by my clients through their loyalty and referrals and whatever. Though they're going to remember that, even if I'm not getting the opportunity to send them a bill.
Definitely. Well, gosh, can we thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with us? Karen and I are just so glad to have your insight to share with our listeners.
It is my pleasure. I'm glad that you were invited me to do it, and I'd love to come back again sometime.
We would love that as well, Ken. It was so great to chat with you, and thank you so much for sharing your insights with our audience. I know that this will be a great benefit to leaders, whether they're leading a solo agency, micro agency, or a large corporation. So thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you. Stay well out there. And until next time, thanks for listening to That Solo Life.